We're going to continue working on the database that we were using in the last movie, but since we set a bunch of startup options to customize the startup process, we need to launch the file in a special way so we can get access to the design tools that we need. And you might think we just go back to the File menu and go back to the Options screen. But you notice that our options that we had set actually remove the ability to get back to the Options screen. So in order to get the database back into a state that we can continue developing, I actually need to close it out and find the file over here on our Windows desktop. Once we find the file here, this Kinetico-Splash, what I need to do is hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, and I'll double-click on the file to open it. I'm going to keep the Shift key held down until the database fully opens, and then I'll switch over to it here. Now we can see that my navigation pane opened. I don't have that custom title at the top. All of my ribbon tabs are here, and if I press the File button here, I can see I can get back into my options there. I'm going to click this arrow to go back. So holding down the Shift key bypasses the majority of the startup options that we had set in the last movie. This will allow us to continue working in our database. Now, one of the things that you can find in many professional applications is the use of a splash screen while the program is loading. A splash screen introduces the application and might give useful information about the program version or who created it. Rather than dumping our end users right into a main menu, we can create a form that acts as a splash screen and helps ease the user into the program. Let's go ahead and create a splash screen by going up to the Create tab and starting a new form in Design View here. Now, one of the things that I include on my splash screens is a logo or introduction to the database. One of the things that we can do is actually borrow techniques from web development. I'm actually going to go over to my web browser here and go to the website for this company. Because websites are developed for the screen, just like our Access databases, a lot of the graphics that you'll find on a website are actually really suitable to use inside of our Access database. So one of the things that I can do is actually take this header image that's at the top of my website and make use of it in the database. I can either click and drag it and drop it onto my desktop, or I can right-click on the image and choose Save Image As. I've already downloaded a copy of this header file and dropped it into the exercise files. So let's go ahead and make use of this in our splash screen. Let's go ahead and close the web browser and go back into Access. So what I want to do is add a background image. I'm going to go up to the Format tab and choose this background image here. I'll click on Browse. I'll go into my Chapter 1 folder, and I'll choose the file here, Kinetico_header.jpg file. Go ahead and say OK. And that'll drop that into the background of my form. Now we need to set a series of properties for our form. I'm going to go to the Design tab and open up the property sheet here. And I'm going to switch over to the Format tab, and we're going to go through this list of properties here. Let me just make this a little wider. First, I'm going to change some of the views that are available. I'm going to change this Allow Form View, I'm going to leave that to Yes, but Allow Datasheet View, I'll change to No, and Allow Layout View, I'm going to change that to No as well. That'll remove the different views that I can get to from my View menu. So now I can only see it in Form View or Design View. Next, I'm going to go to the Picture Alignment property and change it from Center to Top Right. That'll move my background image to the top right of my form. Then I'm going to come down here to the Width, and I'm going to set it to 10 inches. That'll move it over and make my form wide enough so that I can see the full image. And in fact, if I move my navigation pane and remove my property sheet, we can see the full width of the screen here. Let's open up the property sheet again. The next property I want to change is this Auto Center. I'm going to change this to Yes, so that it automatically centers on the screen when it opens. I'm going to change Fit to Screen from Yes to No. That way it stays at the right size. I'm going to change the border style from Sizable to None, so that it has a really clean appearance on the screen. Next, I want to turn off the record selectors and the navigation buttons. Let me show you what those are. I'm going to change my view to Form View here. We can see on the bottom of my screen, I have these record selector buttons down here, and I'm not going to be using these on this particular splash screen. The other thing that I have on the left side of my screen is this big bar here. This is the record selector. I can turn both of these off to clean up the interface. Go back into my Design View, and I'll choose the navigation buttons to No and the record selectors to No. And here I'm just double-clicking to change those options. The next thing I want to remove are the scroll bars. We're not going to need those on the screen, so I'll change its option from Both to Neither. And I'm going to change the Min-Max buttons from Both Enabled to None. Now there's a couple other properties I want to change. Over here on the Other tab, I'm going to change its options from Pop-Up to Yes and Modal to Yes. That'll create a splash screen that automatically pops up centered in the middle of the screen and doesn't let the user click out of it without it disappearing on its own. Finally, we need to set our splash screen to automatically open and close. For that, I'm going to go to the Event tab. Down in the Event tab, I'll need to scroll down a little bit. I'll find a couple of options here for On Timer and a Timer Interval. The timer interval is how many milliseconds we want before firing the On Timer event. I'm going to set this to 3000, which means 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds from the form loading, the onTimer event is going to fire. What I want the onTimer event to do is close the splash screen and open up the main menu form. We can create a macro that does that by clicking on this build button over here on the right and choosing the macro builder and saying OK. So the first step is to close the splash screen. I'm going to say close window is the name of the action step. The object type is going to be form, and the object name is going to be splash screen. We'll add a new action here. The next step is to open up the main menu. So its action is going to be open form. The form name is going to be main menu. And we can leave its view mode to normal. Let's go ahead and close the macro to save it. And I'll choose this option, yes, to save the macro here. And we can finalize the design of our splash screen. I'm going to go grab the bottom of the screen here and drag it up to about the 3-inch mark. I'm also going to add a little bit of text on the bottom. So I can go to the Design tab, choose the Label control here, and I'm going to click on the bottom, and I'm just going to type in version 1.0 to denote the version of this database. I'll go ahead and drag that over here to the right. And let me close the property sheet, and we'll just put this over on the right side of the screen. The last thing I need to do is save and close my splash screen. Now in the macro that we just created, we said we were going to close the form called splash screen. So I need to make sure that I use the same name here. So I'll name it splash screen with no space. We'll go ahead and say OK. And let's check it out. I'll change my view to form view. And we can see that it opens. And after about 3 seconds, it should disappear and the main menu opens. So the last thing we need to do is change the startup options. Instead of opening up the main menu, we need to open up the splash screen. So once again, like we did in the last movie, I'll go to the File tab. We'll go to Options. We'll go to Current Database. And I'll change this Display Form option from Main Menu to our new splash screen. We'll go ahead and say OK. Again, it's going to tell me I need to close and reopen the database, so I'll say OK to that. And I'll go ahead and try it out. So I'll close the database. We'll try opening it again. We see our splash screen in the middle of the screen. And after 3 seconds, it turns off and the main menu starts. So there's our completed splash screen. By using a couple of simple macros attached to the onTimer event, we were able to create a form that pops up briefly, introduces the database, and then continues on with the startup procedure.